Terry Francona made a difference down the stretch and helped the Cincinnati Reds hang on and reach the postseason. We'll tell you how on today's Locked On Reds.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Reds podcast. Locked On Reds is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team, your Reds, every single day. And my name is Jeff. His name is Steve, and we are lifelong Cincinnati Reds fans. We've been podcasting about the Reds for 14 seasons now, and we're glad that you're alongside us. On today's episode, a little bit later on, we're going to continue peeling back the onion that is ownership of the Cincinnati Reds and why they are just doing what the majority of baseball owners are doing. We'll explain that a little bit later on in the show. In just a few minutes, we are really going to dive in and give you our objective analysis of what the front office did in 2025. But we will begin with Terry Francona and why he is a reason that they succeeded and not the opposite in 2025, all on today's episode that is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download FanDuel today. All right, Steve, where we will begin is with Terry Francona, because I think that there were a lot of people, ourselves included, that thought he would make a huge difference. He didn't necessarily make a huge difference, but he made enough of a difference to get the Reds to the postseason.
Well, the difference was in the final month of the season. That's where Francona shined. I think, he became laser focused. He started managing every day like it's the only day that matters. And that's something we haven't seen around here in a while. We've had a run of managers that were willing to throw games away, that were just willing to, you could clearly look at it before the first pitch was even thrown and say, this is a gimme. They're just not even trying to win this game. We did not see that from Francona in situations where it would have been very easy to do so. We saw him focus this team. We saw him get these players to just look at today. You've got to win today, and we'll worry about tomorrow. He managed that way. He managed the pitching staff that way down the stretch. And I think it really made a difference. I think that's the reason why they were able to kind of hang on and be relevant and be around and take advantage of that New York Mets meltdown as it unfolded over the last 2 weeks of the season. It was because of Francona's laser focus. Now, I think the comment section fired up from the cold open. I think the comments are just scrolling right now. But, there were times, I think it took Francona a little while to get his legs under him with this team and get in a spot where he can manage them the way that he wanted to. We saw him make mistakes early. We saw him make a mistake on opening day. Ian Gibaut to close the game. We saw it right out of the gate. You and I knew better. We made eye contact in the stadium and we're like, what the hell is happening right now? It's Ian Gibaut. We knew. Terry learned. And Ian Gibaut didn't get put in very many more of those situations, but it took him some time.
And it's not as if he then was perfect after that. He still made mistakes even up to the last game of the season in the wild card round when he pulls Will Benson with 2 strikes on him. I would love to see him have that moment back because I wonder if he would change his mind. But all that being said, there's plenty you can complain about on a decision-by-decision basis with literally every manager in existence. I'm sure there are hardcore fans of the Big Red Machine that would tell you a couple of times that Sparky Anderson made some funky decisions. That just happens in baseball. You are not a true baseball fan unless you complain at some point during the year about a decision that your manager made and think that it was a bonehead call, because they're human. But I think that the biggest value that he brought to this ball club was that day-to-day mentality. Today is today. We're playing for today. We're not playing for tomorrow. We're not playing for yesterday. Did we get killed yesterday? Whatever. That was yesterday. Today is today. I feel like he did this fantastic job of focusing a generally young ball club. This isn't like the baby ball club that they were in 2023, but Ellie and Noelvi Marte and Matt McClain and Spencer Steer and Tyler Stevenson, all these guys have been going through regimes where it was like, okay, look, this is the way we're going to play today, because if we do anything more in like a week or two, it's really going to be a hard thing for us. Terry Francona was like, bump that. We're going to win today. Period. Plain and simple. And then guess what's going to happen tomorrow? Don't care. We'll worry about it tomorrow. And I think that that was a fantastic thing that he was able to bring to this ball club.
And I know this next point is going to get people telling me, well, David Bell's on a team that's in the World Series, but I believe David Bell in the Reds dugout last season, in the month of September, the Reds don't make the playoffs. I don't think that David Bell would have been able to do that thing you just described, that thing that we're saying about Francona, where he wouldn't worry about what the bullpen was going to look like in 3 days, because David Bell very much worried about what things were going to look like in 3 days and tried to play a long game, much to the detriment of the team. And while David Bell seems to be excelling in his front office role, he did not excel in his dugout role and getting the most out of his players, I don't think.
I was going to say, I think if we asked the Locked On Blue Jays guys what percentage of responsibility you give to David Bell for the reasons that the Blue Jays are in the World Series, I don't think there's going to be that high of a percentage.
No, probably not. So for me, the difference was in the dugout. And I think that we saw a difference from Bell to Francona. We saw an ability to squeeze more out of the players at times there down the stretch. And, I want to be clear that I don't think you're coming from it this angle either, but I just want to be clear. I'm not trying to be like a Francona apologist or,
right,
be a history revisionist and say, well, none of those mistakes matter. They do. There are a couple games that I bet you Francona would like to have back and do something a little different. Probably pinch hitting Miguel Andújar with 2 strikes for Will Benson is one of them. It was unfair to Andújar. It was unfair to Benson. It was just, I don't know what he was
weird.
thinking.
Yeah.
The Ian Gibaut thing on opening day, guarantee he would like to do something different there. And we saw a few of those throughout the season. Now we talked about those games, right? We had a whole category of those games that the Reds should have won, that they ultimately lost. And a couple of those run Francona, a couple managerial decisions in that batch, Ian Gibaut being the prime example, the opening day one. But for the most part, those were games where the players just melted down and couldn't hit a ball with a runner on third and nobody out. Things like that. That wasn't Francona driven. That was just poor player performance driven. But there are, the gut check, the eye check, the look at how this team was in September check that says Francona made a difference. And I can look at both things, and both things can be true. He did make some mistakes. It took him a while to get going. It took him a while to learn this team. There are things he should have done different, including playing Elly De La Cruz 162 games, but there are things he got right. I can see both. I can acknowledge both. And I can feel good about saying Francona in this dugout helped this team get a postseason berth.
I think that the way that we evaluate Terry Francona's first year as manager of the Reds, the way that you and I are evaluating it right now is too balanced for most people. Because when it comes to managers, they tend to get either too much credit or too much blame. And we're not trying to ascribe either one when it comes to our evaluation of him. I think that he did fine. I think that before the season, we were saying things like he's worth like 5 or 10 WAR, like he could probably add 5 or 10 wins to last year's total. That may have been a bit of an overreaction. I will begrudge that. But at the same time, I still think that he is a big reason as to why the Reds got there. And there were a lot of folks that wanted to say, well, if you think that, then you haven't watched this team. Well, then what is your take on that? Because is your take the reason that they didn't win more is because of Terry Francona? Because that doesn't make any sense either. Like there's not a realm of reality where it says, all right, they could have won more because they had a manager, but because they had a better manager, but they also would not have made the playoffs had they not had Terry Francona. Like that thought process doesn't make sense at all.
No, it doesn't. It's very easy. Look, we said he was a five win difference. They went from 77 wins to 83 wins.
So he's a 6-win difference.
He's a 6-win difference. But was that all him? No. No. But I'm telling you that he made a difference. And I want to try something new this offseason, Jeff, which is to be more balanced. And how we present things and how we present individual performances. And, I think it is not unfair to say that he was a big part of what September looked like while having some flaws along the way. And we need to get better as a fan base about being able to evaluate things that way. But you're right. I mean, if the Dodgers win the World Series, is it because Dave Roberts is in the dugout or is it because of the killer lineup they have? It's going to be because of the killer lineup they have. If the Blue Jays win the World Series, is it going to be because the killer lineup failed or Dave Roberts is a bum and he should be fired? Well, I guarantee you Locked On Dodgers are going to be talking with their fan base about why Dave Roberts should be fired if they don't win the World Series, because that's what the fans are going to want to talk about. So it's not fair. It's just not fair. It's the way it is.
Right. And that's what managers take on. But when it comes to evaluating a manager, your logical next step is, okay, what it is the players that he is given. So the players that he was given, how do we look back on what Nick Krall gave to Terry Francona? We'll tell you exactly how that works coming up next.
This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement on this sports season. Whether you're following the NFL, the NBA, or both, there's no better time to jump in on the action than right now with Prize Picks. If you haven't tried it yet, Prize Picks is the simplest way to play. You just pick more or less on at least 2 player stats, and if you get them right, you win. It takes just 60 seconds or less to make your lineup, and you can play from anywhere Prize Picks operates, including Kentucky, just in case you were wondering. You jump in, you can pick more, you can pick less. So if you want to pick more, take Jeimer Chase, for example, more yards, more catches, more touchdowns, absolutely. And just take all those same categories for the Bengals defense, allowing more. You can get in on the action over at Prize Picks. Just download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB, and you're going to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONMLB for $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, where it's good to be right. Make sure you're subscribed. That way you don't miss any of the great off-season content we've got coming your way. We're going to be here with you all off-season long, reviewing what went down in 2025 and getting you ready for 2026 as we move towards spring training. It's a little bit closer each and every day, and we'll have you covered all of the way. All right, Jeff, we talked about Terry Francona. We talked about the impacts in the dugout, differences that were made, both positive and negative. But you have to look at what he had to work with. You have to look at the group of players that Terry Francona was given and told, go win with these guys. And that bunch of players are probably a big part of how the front office and Marty and the guys that all lobbied Terry Francona to come out of retirement and manage again. That group of players, that core, was very enticing for Terry. He was really excited about this young core. But Nick Krall needed to go do some things, and he needed to deliver some fills, some Band-Aids, some spot repairs to that group of players. And when you look back on who was brought in and how they performed, I think if you go all the way back to last offseason when Francona was hired, I think Nick Krall did probably a C- worth of a job getting this team prepared to be a good version of itself and hit the field on opening day. We saw that with players being asked to play hurt and out of position and all of the things we saw on opening day with this ball club. But then I think through the trade deadline, Nick Krall gets a better grade, and he went out and made some decent moves at the deadline that didn't get a lot of people excited, but ultimately panned out to be pretty good moves. So it's a mix for me with how this front office really performed. And I think at the end of the day, C+ for last year in hindsight is probably warranted. Where do you stand with how Nick Krall performed?
I think C+, B-. Like, you definitely cannot give him an A because the biggest need was not addressed. They did not get a middle of the order bat at any point. And part of that was they were gambling that CES was that guy, and they lost on that gamble. But
Austin Hayes would become that guy.
Or that Austin Hayes would become that. But whenever neither of those things happened, there was no supplemental move made. It was a lot of, well, okay, we'll work with what we got. And what we got was insufficient. He was able to improve the defense. He was able to build a bullpen that was pretty competent, albeit not the best, but it also wasn't the worst. And he was able to make sure that, they had the right pieces in place when they needed them to in like pitching cases and things like that. So I think ultimately he's okay, but it wasn't a great year. I'd say B- if you were to ask me a grade that I would give him, but C+, B-, whatever, that's like not that big of a difference between the two of us. I think it's very understood though, that where he is, I think it would be surprised to see him get an A. Like, I think that the best we could hope for based on his marching orders, and something that we discussed yesterday, in case you missed it, we had a great conversation about, what his expectations are as a front office guy for this organization. Based on those expectations, I think it would be a surprising thing to see him get an A.
Yeah, I agree. And there's a couple things to unpack, a few things you just said. Yeah, if we're handing out grades, hindsight grades, I give him an F for the way that he dealt with the outfield, because the outfield has been a problem for multiple seasons now, and it still just hasn't been fixed. Inexplicably hasn't been fixed. And there's no way to squint and make an excuse for it any longer. It's just terrible. And it's an F. I will give him credit for this with his handling of the bullpen. You're right. He built a pretty decent bullpen. There were some surprises. Pagan performed way better than I thought he was going to perform for this team in 2025. But here's where I really would like to give Nick Krall some credit. There were guys heading into this season that you were counting on, that I was counting on, that the Reds were clearly counting on to be dudes in this bullpen. I'm looking at you, Alexis Diaz. I'm looking at you, Sam Mull. And when those guys failed to perform, Nick Krall didn't do that thing they've done in the past, which is keep them around for way too long, which is keep running them out there, keep them on the roster. Oh, they're going to get it right. We believe in them. They're going to figure it out. No, he sent them down. He sent them to the minors and then traded away Alexis Diaz, who ultimately proved for the Dodgers.
They learned from Hunter Strickland. How about that?
They learned from Hunter Strickland. Did. They absolutely did. And it was refreshing to see. I was happy to see that. I was happy to see them cut their losses with Jeimer Candelario. Something this team probably wouldn't have done in the past. We saw them eat the Mike Moustakas contract. We saw them eat the Jeimer Candelario contract. These are positive moves for a franchise that, used to clutch its pearls and say, we can't possibly pay a guy to not play for us.
Well, and even Mike Moustakas was in his last year. Matt Kemp was in his last year whenever they cut ties with him. This is a multi-year, nothing burger that the front office just ate when it came to eating the contract of Jeimer Candelario. So a lot of credit.
So I will give them credit for that. Now, we talked yesterday, and I'll double down on it. I will lean into it again. If you're asking the people that are evaluating Nick Krall's job performance, the people that are in charge of that's the Castellinis. If you ask them right now to evaluate Nick and give him a letter grade, they would tell you he gets an A+. He did every single thing we asked him to do. He checked every box, and my bank account supports that. That's what the Castellini family will say. Nick Krall and his job performance is nowhere near tied to the win-loss record of this team. Same like Duke Tobin down there at Paycor. Neither of the GMs of the major sports teams in Cincinnati's jobs are tied to the win-loss record of the clubs they build, which is crazy to me, but that is where we've landed in the city of Cincinnati. They're both designated to keep their teams relevant and make their bosses money, and both of those dudes are doing that, and it makes me crazy.
Yeah, fan expectation is not ownership expectation, which is unfortunate, but it's key to understand that, because where we might assess a front office to be in the hot seat or, to have the crosshairs squarely on them, that's not what Reds ownership is doing right now. Because think about your job, what you do every single day. Your boss has expectations of you, and if for some reason you go outside of those expectations, or you go outside of those guidelines and regulations in order to accomplish something, then you will have your boss's attention on you for all the wrong reasons. You will have your version of a hot seat. That's what would happen if Nick Krall would stretch and go and get somebody who maybe is outside the budget, or maybe stretch and go get too much.
And you started talking about this yesterday, and I think you should expand upon the thought, bring it back around again, because you started talking about Dick Williams yesterday, and I was like, put a pin in that, because we need to talk about it on today's show for this next two segments. So why don't you bring that back up again?
Well, and actually, to set it up, and then we'll really expound on it here in just a moment, but when it comes to the measure of Dick Williams and why he left the team, is because his goal was to make this a 90-win ball club, a 100-win ball club, a division championship ball club. His goal was to just build a good team come hell or high water. And that is absolutely not what ownership wants. I'll tell you why that is coming up next. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or want to ride that hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Plus, they've got the futures odds when it comes to the NBA Finals. Right now, the Oklahoma City Thunder are favored to get yet another championship at 2-1 odds to win the NBA Finals right now. Denver Nuggets right behind them, and the Cleveland Cavaliers both with the same odds at 7-1. And then the New York Knicks at 11-1. I think we all know what happens with the New York Knicks, but hey, I'm not here to judge. Anyway, they've got plenty of futures odds over there as well. And if you're a new user, your first winning $5 wager will get you $300 in bonus bets. So what are you waiting for? Go have fun on FanDuel today. Download that FanDuel app right now. If you can't watch us on YouTube, you can always listen to us on your favorite podcast app. We're on all of them because we're free and available everywhere you get your podcast. Also, when you're done with today's show, make sure you check out Locked On MLB Game Night. They've got you covered all through the World Series, looking at both sides of each game and getting you set for the next one coming up as we move toward the end of the season. It's kind of a bummer to say, but we're not long away from having no baseball for a couple of months. But we will be with you talking Reds baseball every single day right here on Locked On Reds. So make sure that you follow along. All right, Steve, we started this conversation. We'll continue it. You know, the Dick Williams of it all and ownership and how ownership plays into this. And it's interesting because we don't usually do a lot of ownership talk. I think there are a lot of Reds fans that would like to complain about ownership and things like that. But it's important to understand the balance that owners are striking. And this is not just the Reds. This is not just, Cincinnati's a small market, and so they are doing this certain thing. They're following the marching orders, and I don't necessarily know that it's marching orders, but they are following their peers. When it comes to this, there's a lot of other teams that do what the Reds do. And I'm not talking about the exact number of dollars spent. I'm talking about the percentages of dollars spent. And this plays into our conversation about Dick Williams. I just want to jump into this real quick, and we'll get back to that part. But let's look at this. This is a list that was derived by Forbes based on 2022 revenue that were calculated by Forbes. They aren't reported. The revenue numbers are not made public for plenty of reasons, but they aren't made public. So Forbes calculated this revenue for each team from 2024, and then they looked at the payroll plus the tax for any team that's in the luxury tax of what they are spending in 2025. If you notice on the right side of the screen, if you're listening to it as on the app, I've got a graphic up right now that shows you those numbers and then the percentage of 2024 revenue that is spent on 2025 payroll. 2/3 of the league spend less than 50% of the revenue that they made the year before. And this is including the Yankees. This is including the Cubs. This is including the San Francisco Giants, teams that do make plenty of revenue, but they spend a similar percentage. The Reds are 21st in the league with 42.6% of their revenue having been spent on the payroll for 2025. But that is they are with the majority of teams that spend less than 50% of the revenue on the payroll.
And you have to look at, not only who the owners are, but the ownership structure of this team. It's very easy to look at this and be like, well, the Castellinis own the team, and they're the ones being cheap, and this is just the way it is. The Castellinis don't own 51% of the Cincinnati Reds. I think it's important for people to understand that. But the way that this team is structured, the way the ownership group is structured, there is a controlling interest. That's not 51% of the team. It's just the share that gets to be in charge. And that's what the Castellinis purchased from Carl Linder. They purchased the controlling share. That's why they're in charge. That's why Bob's the boss. So those Castellinis and that ownership group have decided we're not asking the other owners to put more money in. We're not asking for a cash call. That's what it's called. They're not doing a cash call, that we're going to operate this way and they're in charge. And that's the way it has to be. Now, bringing that all back to Dick Williams. Dick Williams has family members that are in that ownership group. And he wanted to build that 90-100 win team. He wanted to win divisions. He wanted to win a World Series. And when he got pushed back from the Castellinis, he went to his family, who in board meetings put pressure on the Castellini group to spend some money. And they did. And Dick Williams got his way. And then COVID happened and derailed the entire thing. And the Castellinis were then asking Dick Williams to dismantle what he built. And he was absolutely not going to do that. He was not going to play ball. So Dick Williams wasn't fired, but it may have got there. He saw the writing on the wall. He wanted to be part of a winner, not a 500 team that might sneak into the playoffs. And he went and found him a nice job over at Skyline, and he bucked out of baseball. That's how bad he didn't want to participate in this process. But then in Nick Krall, they found a guy that was willing to do what they ask of him and has been willing to do that and been willing to say the things he wants them to say. And that's how we ended up where we are. It's because Dick Williams had a different vision than the person that owns the controlling share of the Cincinnati Reds.
And it's interesting because there was a great blog post about this on a blog called "And This One Blogs to the Reds." This is by Rory Billing. I'm going to include the link to this blog. It's a free, at least I think, yeah, it's a free blog. It was on Substack a while ago, but I'm going to include the link to the post that I'm referring to down in our description of today's episode. But like, let's use this, and we are using this as kind of like backing for this, because what you mentioned, controlling interest and all this other stuff, Bob Castellini owns the most voting shares, because not every share of the Reds is a voting share that is owned, but Bob Castellini and 18 other people / groups make up the ownership group of the Cincinnati Reds. And this is not like the ownership group of the Dodgers, where it's like they print money and they do whatever they want. It's just, this is multiple people that have all come together, and they split 27 shares. So of $270 million. So each share is $10 million of this group of people. And whenever the Castellinis took over the majority of voting shares back in 2006, they declared that there would be no more cash calls when it comes to, asking for more money for the team. So anytime you hear people say, well, why don't they just invest more money into the team? That's because that's a declaration they made over or almost 20 years ago at this point. So there's a lot that goes into that. Plus you have this. The whole idea of the percentage of revenue and all this other stuff, there's a reason that they don't spend more than they make. It's because they run the Reds like a business. And there are a couple of people, a la Steve Cohen, that run it like a passion project. There are 3 teams that spend more than 70% of 2024 revenue on their payroll. 2 of them are in the World Series. One of them had a just ridiculous collapse in the New York Mets. The New York Mets spent 90% of their 2024 revenue on their 2025 payroll. The Dodgers and the Blue Jays are the other 2 teams that spend more than 70% of their revenue from the year before. And the interesting part about the Dodgers is not all of the money that they spent is on this year's payroll. They deferred a bunch of that. That's why we joke about them being the Los Angeles deferrals. But the truth is the Reds run this team like their ownership group runs this team like a business. Doesn't mean they're stingy. It's just the strategy that they've employed. Mm-hmm. And what we as fans would prefer happen is that they run it like a passion project. But that would mean a dramatic shift in everything that they know and do, which would literally mean they would have to change owners. Like there would have to be somebody else come in, some crazy billionaire come in and take over the team, or a group of people that are billionaires that take over the team, and they just decide that they are okay with the idea of potentially losing money on a team that does not succeed. And the Castellini group will never make that decision.
Right. There's a great quote in that blog. I don't know if you have it pulled up to go, but there's a great paragraph in there that basically describes that.
Yeah, at the toward the end of the blog that Rory Billing had wrote, and again, I'll have the link down in the description of today's episode, he says, should, or she, Rory, not sure. Anyway, Rory says, should sports teams be run like a business or a passion project? If it's the former, the Castellinis have actually done a damn good job. If it's the latter, well, they should sell the team. If and only if they can find a massively wealthy, good soul who is simply in it for the happiness of the fans. So yes, we will never sit here and say that we don't want the Reds to spend more money, that we don't want the Reds to go all in, that we don't want them to go crazy and build the kind of fantasy baseball roster that we could only imagine. The truth of the matter is that's not what the Castellinis and this current ownership group are ever going to do. They are going to build a roster that fits within their budget and keeps them in the black that could possibly also contend.
And these are all the little bits and pieces that we're going to keep throwing at you throughout the offseason. And as we get closer to next offseason, when it's going to be all economics all the time, as the collective bargaining agreement expires, these are the things that matter, right? We look at the Castellinis, and I think this is why I've said in the past, and I know I've said it on the show, Jeff, you've heard me say this all the time, that the Castellinis are never going to sell this team because there's nothing else that they can get involved in that's going to make them money the way that this team makes them money without them having to do any work, without them really having to do anything. This is passive income, really, for the Castellinis. They're never going to sell this team. Now, the new CBA and the economics of that and salary floors and all of the things that we're going to see get bantered about may ultimately push them to have to make a move. But as it is status quo right now, I think they're very happy with the money that they're making, the results they're seeing on the field, the amount of people that are coming out to the ballpark. I think they're going to be hard pressed. We may see a little bit of increase to the payroll for 2026. I would love to see them push it up to, the $140, $150 million mark. That's probably asking too much from me to them. They're probably not going to go that high. But it could be a difference in between, 82, 83 wins and getting this team to 87, 88 wins and maybe challenging for the division a little bit more than they did last season. So I know, folks, this is not the funnest topic in the world, but I think it's important to start laying these foundations because all of this stuff matters as we move into the end of this season, as the free agents hit the market, as the negotiations begin. It's important to approach this from a realistic standpoint of what it is this ownership group is going to be willing to do and what this ownership group is going to expect from Nick Krall building the 2026 version of the Cincinnati Reds.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to really see the whole picture that this blog paints. I think it's really good information because, think about this. The Reds are now estimated by Forbes to be valued in the $1.25 to $1.5 billion range. This ownership group that currently controls the team paid $270 million for that. That means that the ownership group has received roughly a 9% annual rate of return on its original investment. That sounds great, but actually loses out to the S&P 500 in the stock market by a slim margin. So had this group of people actually put their money in the stock market for the S&P 500, they would actually have more money right now than what they got from the Reds. So while it doesn't seem as though you should be, reticent to put more money into a winner here, there's also reasonings for why they haven't yet. And I think it's important to know all of these things going into it because we're looking for balance here this offseason. We have been very overly positive in the past for sure, not to the point that we're trying to kid ourselves, but at the same time, we're looking at everything from a positive angle, and we will look for the positive balance as we move forward with this ball club because I think it's important to understand what is most likely to happen and what helps this team as well. And that's where we will promise to deliver for you in this offseason. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Locked On Reds. We'll be back with some more fun stuff. Tomorrow, we're going to really dive into Matt McClain. We're going to dive into Key Brian Hayes. We're going to talk about Graham Ashcraft. Lots of great stuff coming for you on tomorrow's podcast. Lots of great stuff coming for you all out season. Make sure you subscribe. Become an everydayer of the Locked On Reds podcast because we're going to be talking Reds baseball every single day.
Whew. We're once again not going to be on Bob's Christmas card list.
Enough of the ownership talk. Oy. Necessary, but oy.
Think Phil will say hi to us at Reds Fest this year?
We might get a triple take at Reds Fest.